that question so many times, and I think it's a story of serendipity, really, starting with growing up in Johannesburg in South Africa, which is the quintessential mining town turned into a big city. So surrounded by old tailings facilities, or mine dumps, as we called it back then, and having a passion for the environment. I think it was no surprise that I ended up wanting to study something in the field of science, coupled with being a very poor student. So parents couldn't pay for me to extend my studies, and ended up with a bursary that so happened to combine mining and my passion for environment. And I think also timing. Back then, and this is sort of the mid-90s, environment or sustainability just was sort of thrust into the foreground. Wasn't a big topic before then, really. So I think it actually, I didn't choose mining chose me. And I'm really grateful for it, because I feel every day I wake up, I'm able to live out my passion. And in a sector which I think often gets a really bad rap, but we are able to make massive changes if we play, our part in the bigger picture. So I guess it was, maybe we chose each other. Maybe that's the better way to frame it. Look, I've been in mining for the past 20 odd years, maybe 24 years now. I've stopped counting, and it's certainly progressed. I remember a time when simple things like getting boots that fit. I used to wear boots that were a number of sizes too big for me, just because female boots at the sizes that females would start wearing them was just not made. Or wearing PPE that was a number of sizes too big because you couldn't find it. And so I have seen a lot of change. I also think the dialogue has shifted. So having discussions around having adequate representation of women, or inclusion and diversity more broadly, but in this sense, women at the leadership table, as we know, that's progressed a lot. But I don't think we've quite arrived at the destination where we would like to be, to have all of the different and wonderfully diverse people that make up the world represented within our workforce. So in some countries, mining still classes women as, or it's illegal rather for women to be in mining positions. We still have change room issues. In 2021, 24 years on, we still have change room issues, which is, I think, absolutely foundational. And what I often pick up and say is that many a truth is spoken in jest. And I think it's the sort of quips that are made that show that in terms of respect and inclusion, we still have a really long way to go. I do find, however, that women are increasingly making their voices heard. I don't think to its fullest extent yet, but that has certainly changed in the workforce. And then, just looking at how we reward, recruit, we'll probably get to that, but that has a huge transformation over the last 20 years. So I think progress made, but still a lot more to do. I think the first thing is not to see your gender as a drawback. I think we should see it as a secret weapon. If I look at what we're currently valuing within organizations, mining and more broadly, around performance, shared value propositions, we have to purposefully inject and inculcate leadership that is caring and people-focused. And that comes not exclusively to women, but more naturally to women. So we need to tap into that secret power and not see it as our superpower, not our kryptonite. And I also think make your voice heard. I remember starting off in the sector feeling incredibly intimidated because I would more often than not be the only female at the table, and that made me not speak and not make my voice heard. And if I could give any woman coming into the sector, irrespective of age, it's make your voice heard. speak up when you feel you've got a point to make, because more often than not, it'll add value to the conversation. And I think the last thing, and this is something that really helped me in my career, is have a support system of other women. I sometimes think women don't support each other enough. I've had a circle of wing women, we call ourselves, over the last couple of decades, and especially in the last while, where we really look out for one another, support one another, encourage one another, especially, if there are issues that we need to resolve collectively. And that I think makes a massive difference. Yeah, I look at mining as a as a sector, and I just think it's incredibly it's challenge and opportunity rich. If we look at the issues facing the globe, the planet at the moment, the decarbonisation challenges, we can't progress in any of those areas without mining, responsible mining. And that could place all elements of sustainability at the core. And for me, and I think for many women coming into the sector, that presents a wonderful and exciting opportunity to make a change and to be part of that positive drive within the sector. So I think that is one area. Just the job itself, the experience you'll get, the growth opportunities. I reflect on my career, and I've been privileged enough to work across probably 19 countries now. I've experienced different cultures, met so many wonderful people, been able to grow as an individual. So I think just the sector itself is very attractive. I just don't think we've done a good job of selling that side of mining. I also think where we're at now in the sector, and I didn't mention this earlier, but I think fairness in pay and the drive to have fair representation at senior levels means that you will walk into a role, especially with a focus in mining, where there's no longer the I think the concern that your salary is not fair or representative of what's happening elsewhere in the world. And I think a change also recently, which will hopefully go a long way to attract talent, is the balance of sustainability and the job. And within bonus schemes, for example, having not just financial performance or safety performance, which both I agree is important, but having representation of females in senior leadership positions is not part of the bonus scheme, and that makes, I think, a big difference in attracting talent, because that you're walking into a great job, but it's also getting the fair recognition for what you're doing. And I think the other question I often get, and that there's a perception in mining, is, will I be able to have a balance between my day job or my role and also my family, friends? And increasingly it's becoming more and more of a imperative, and as it should be, right? We shouldn't feel like it's a trade-off to go to work, but also feel like you want to not impinge on what makes up your life in total. So I think the flexible work arrangements, including paternity leave, does make up the value proposition. So again, I think if I reflect on 20 years ago versus today, it's chalk and cheese. Look, it differs from person to person, so I don't think there's a one size fits all, and I'm glad there isn't a one size fits all in development plans. But I think there are many different dimensions to retaining talent. Some of it links back to what I said earlier around the job itself and the growth opportunities that presents. But I think making sure that there's some visibility around the growth opportunities and next steps, which is, if that's not well known, it's hard to see what the future opportunities could bring. So quite a bit of effort is put into having those open and honest conversations about the individual, where the individual would like to take their careers, and linking that back into the opportunities within the business. I think attracting and retaining, sort of two sides of the same coin, and not just selling it, but making sure that there's actual examples of those growth opportunities. And the feedback I've had in my team, we've got a fairly diverse team, my own personal experience and also the feedback we've had more broadly from team members. It's not just the remuneration that makes a difference. It's also recognizing the value that the team members bring to the table. So I think a lot of it is not the systems and processes, but it's really just creating that environment where people can grow and flourish. Look, we do have, so firstly, 80% in our organization at least, so of the total workforce is men, right? So if you look at the feeder pool, currently it is skewed. So I think that just inherently will make it harder to have a similar feeder pool of talent up into the senior levels in the organization. And I think some of the barriers also linked to what I mentioned at the outset of this discussion is a perception around the skill set and whether women are ready yet. There's not ready yet concept, which I've heard so many times. And I think that is a barrier that we need to break through culturally within the organization, especially in technical organizations like mining, where there's a very traditional skill set around engineering or technical skill sets that we don't have as many women coming through those pathways as we do men. Now we can obviously influence that, especially in terms of looking at the attracting graduates into those roles. And then I think also what I've just said around having an environment where there is flexibility. So if you want to start a family, it's not seen as a drawback, but it's embraced. If you need flexible work time, and this goes for women as well as men, but I do think it still plays out more directly within a female's reality, is not feeling like you're having to make those trade-off decisions. If I reflect on the exit interviews that were done on all women leaving the organization, especially the senior women that's left, that is probably the one area that gets cited most, is I feel like I can't do both. And I feel that is where the flexible work arrangements and just thinking more creatively about role descriptions and role design will really drive a change. Look, coming from South Africa and being very aware of that process, I do agree with having targets. I do think, however, that those targets need to be owned and the why understood by the organizations. So spending the upfront effort into establishing the value proposition and buy-in versus the telling and instructing, I do think will drive a different culture within the organization. And my experience of having legislative targets is that whilst it does establish, just based on looking at the numbers, it does drive that change. What I have seen in the culture is not healthy, because the value proposition is lost in the being told that transformation is needed versus driving it through the organization. I think there needs to be pressure though. I do think we need to hold ourselves to account. I do think, and there is a lot of peer pressure, I think, between mining companies as well, in terms of realizing that, it just makes sense to do it. And the unintended consequences, right? And I've experienced this in South Africa, being a female, where mining quotas was put in place, where often females then get the branding that they are in senior roles because it's a legislative requirement and it's not based on merit. And so I think targets, yes. Should it be legislated? I'm not completely convinced. If we're not able to sell the value proposition, which we know is just it's crystal clear why a diverse leadership team and workforce just makes for better business. If we can't sell that and it has to be legislated, I think there's something really wrong in how we're selling that proposition. Just firstly, I think the pandemic has hit everyone incredibly hard, and I feel for every single person that's been touched by the pandemic. But statistically, yes, to answer your question, it has hit women harder, and it's based on the numbers, right? So women make up around 40% of the global workforce. Even in mining, it would be even less. But yet, if we look at the overall job losses, it's almost half. Half women, so 50 odd % of women have experienced the job losses. So I think it links back to the earlier conversation we had around the types of jobs that women do, where it's still very much split between the functional type roles being women that do those jobs, and then the more operational roles being men, and then also the perception that operational roles are the mission critical roles within the business. And then when we have to let people go, it inevitably skews it towards women. So I think we do need to rethink the role of women in and what types of jobs they do, versus just assuming it's the functional roles that they're more suitable for. Look, a couple of things. You have to have some grit and tenacity, and not giving up. And I think passion helps that. So being passionate about the day job. But if I really have to call out one thing that made a real difference in my career, it was a mentor in my career that took an interest, and I think to me that is crucial for us making the transition last. And it's not just male mentors, but it is having that go-to individual. In my case, it was a man that took an interest and helped me shape my career, took chances of me, appointed me in roles way before I was ever ready, giving me the opportunities to grow and being a sounding board to ask the questions that you might otherwise feel you can't ask in an open forum. So it's something I'm personally very passionate about. I think paying it forward, being a trusted advisor and mentor to women so that we give the opportunities to grow is, I think, made the change in my career. I was also not shy to ask for opportunities. It was incredibly hard to put my hand up. I grew up in a culture where you just naturally, kids were seen and not heard. So it was pretty tough for me, but it was something I think that made a big difference, is being brave and asking for what you think you deserve. I don't think we should think that we can just sit back and wait for everyone else around us to make the change for us, but owning that space. Look, a couple of things. I think all our talents add up to 10. And what I mean by saying this is that we all have unique contributions we make to a business, or to a role, or to a team. And I wish I knew this earlier, because I place so much pressure on myself to almost measure up to what I perceive to be the preferred model of what it takes to succeed in mining, versus just being my authentic self, and not feeling that I need to apologize for that. I have seen people trying to fit into a mold, and especially women trying to fit into what they think the mold is within a mining organization, and just being who you are right from day dot, I think is something I wish I knew earlier. And that links probably with I wish I had less self-doubt, and that I leaned in earlier in my career. It is something I struggled with, and as I mentioned, a mentor made it easier for me to do that. But looking back with the experience I now have, I probably would have spoken up far earlier. Look, I think it actually links very tightly with what I've just said, is, and I'm going to say it again because I think it's worth probably saying twice, is be your authentic self. It is hard. It's a challenging sector, and it becomes even more challenging if you're trying to be something you're not. I also think, as I've said earlier, it is to speak your mind, because I can promise you that the voice that you bring to the room, your perspective will be unique, and it will add to the overall discussion in the room. And then it takes a village. I put a lot of effort into building networks within an organization, because at the end of the day, asking for help, putting your hand up when you're not quite sure what needs to happen, is so much easier when you've got your network around it. So I would, that's probably the top advice I would give.